Hello, brovs. We're back with the second part of The Mystery of Number 21. 21. A thrilling ghost story by Mrs. Eden Southworth. Chapter 4. The next morning, Mabel was better. The night's rest had refreshed her. The first thing she did was to go to the typewriter and open it, and draw the paper out with its line of mysterious writing. Here it is. In great excitement, she rushed to the head of the stairs and called her mother, who had left her fast asleep an hour before, and had gone down to the kitchen to get breakfast. "Mother, oh mother, come quickly, here is another message. Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing." Mrs. Rose ran upstairs and took the paper Mabel handed her. "Dress yourself, my dear, and come down to breakfast," was all she said. "But, oh, mother, this marvelous, amazing thing that happens to us, who can doubt that the dead return to us? Come down to breakfast, my dear. You have eaten nothing for several days, and I have cocoa and rice cakes for you." "Mother, I couldn't eat anything until I find out what this message is. Let us go to the medium at once," pleaded Mabel. "And have you fainting away?" I don't want you to see the end here. "And have you fainting away again? Child, the message may be genuine, but as it stands, but that woman can't interpret it," said Mrs. Rose. But Mabel persisted with tears and sobs that threatened to break into hysterics, so that the distressed mother had to yield so far as to promise to go and fetch the woman to the house if only the daughter would eat some breakfast. Mabel complied as well as she was able to, and immediately after the meal was over, Mrs. Rose went out to bring the medium. The performance of the day before was repeated with very little difference. The interpretation was very like the one the previous occasion. The lost lover was often near his beloved, in the spirit, if her eyes could only be opened to see him. He was also preparing a beautiful home for her in the spirit land. Mabel had been tremendously excited during the interview, and when at last the medium went away $1 richer, the poor girl dropped down on the bed in another collapse. Mrs. Rose was in despair, and half inclined to follow the old darkey's advice, pardon me, and heave that thing out in the windy, or lock it up in the garret. Mind you, I don't read any of these books until I turn on the camera, so if there's any kind of swearing or racial remark, I have no control over it. Meanwhile, the report of the ghostly operator on the typewriter spread through the neighborhood and all over the city, and excited the eager interest of all the spiritualists who heard of it. Crowds came to the house to make inquiries. The excitement was at its height when one fine, bracing morning Mrs. Rose got her daughter up and dressed and asked her to go down and sit with her in the bright and cheerful front room that had once been Charlie Manners' apartment. She established the pale girl comfortably in the deep armchair and seated herself beside her, with a gauntlet on which she was securing the ends of the seams. "Oh, what a selfish and self-indulgent wretch I have been, mother. Give me that work. I am not strong enough to sew on the machine, but I can finish the ends of the seams while I recline here," said Mabel, holding out her hands. It was a sign of improvement that Mrs. Rose was very glad to see, and she promptly gave the gauntlets into the girl's hands, while she herself went and dragged in her sewing machine from the next room and sat down to work. "It is the best thing you can do for yourself, my dear, else I would not let you attempt it. Occupation is the best remedy for a troubled mind." "It is the right thing, anyway, mamma." Here was another good sign. Mabel had not called her mamma since the sorrow came, but always mother. While Mrs. Rose was secretly rejoicing over this, they heard a ringing step rushing up the stairs with a cheery voice, exclaiming, "Where are you all? I hear you talking." Mother and daughter both started to their feet. "Oh, here you are," cried the same glad voice, and Charlie Manners burst into the room. Charlie Manners in flesh and blood, very fine flesh and very rich blood, if one might judge by the fresh, ruddy complexion and sparkling eyes of the young man. Mabel uttered a gasping cry and was caught in his arms before she could sink to the floor. Why, what is this? Mabel, my girl! Oh, how white and thin she is! Mabel, Mabel! Has she been, oh, has she been ill? Cried the young fellow with a sudden change from joy to distress as he supported the swooning girl in his arms. Oh, Charlie, Charlie, is this a miracle? We thought you were lost, exclaimed Mrs. Rose simultaneously with his anxious questions. Mabel, Mabel, look at her, panted the lover. She is overcome with a shock of joy. She will come around and be all right presently, said Mrs. Rose, bringing a glass of water, which she put to the lips of the girl. With a great effort of self-recovery, Mabel succeeded in swallowing a few mouthfuls of the water. Thank God, oh Charlie, Charlie, she breathed, and he placed her again in her armchair and knelt before her. We thought you were lost. Everybody said the Alda had sunk in that awful storm, said Mrs. Rose. Well, she came very near it, Mabel, my dearest. Are you better now? He tenderly inquired. I am well and happy now. Oh, so well and happy now that I could die of joy, breathed the girl in a low, faint voice. And so am I, exclaimed the widow a little incoherently. So delighted to see you safe at home after all our groundless mourning. How in the world did you escape? It seems like a miracle. Almost a miracle indeed. Our ship was tossed and tumbled, rolled over and over, and was beaten and battered and all but wrecked in that tempest, and reached port against all odds and probability in a very shattered condition. Doubt if she is not done for. But Mabel, sweet, you have been ill. Ah, I know you have, he said, changing the subject as he still knelt beside her chair and chafed her cold, thin, white hands in his own. Only with grieving after you, Charlie, nothing else. Now that you have come, she will pick up fast enough, exclaimed her mother with a smile. Oh, but I am well, quite well now, feebly murmured Mabel. But the typewriter, mother, she added with a mystified air. The typewriter! What about the typewriter? Brightly inquired the young man, thinking that the machine had been sold or stolen or injured, and determined to make light of the misfortune. Mabel, tell him all about it. I must go into the kitchen and get dinner, said the widow as she smilingly left the room. Manners rose, drew a chair to Mabel's side, seated himself, and inquired again, What has happened to my old comrade, the typewriter? Oh, such a strange, mysterious, wonderful thing, Charlie, she answered, and then she told him the story with every detail. Manners laughed aloud. Oh, how can you make light of it, Charlie? Such a terrible, mysterious thing. Possess your soul in patience, my sweet, until tonight, at the hour of the ghostly writer's visit, when I think I can unravel the mystery, he answered, still laughing. And then, though she questioned him eagerly, he insisted on deferring his explanation. I lost my place. His explanation until he should be able to demonstrate its truth by unmasking the ghostly operator in their presence. After this, they talked of his visit to England, his legacy, and their future plans, until Mrs. Rose called them to dinner. Mrs. Rose was deeply curious when told of Manners' promise to reveal the mystery of the haunted typewriter, but she was enjoined by Manners to keep the secret until after the denouement. That night, at 9:30, the three went upstairs to the chamber where the possessed typewriter stood on the little table, and where the gas was turned low. Now there is nothing like demonstration. Dear Mrs. Rose, please sit here close to the gas burner, and as soon as I give the signal, turn the gas on full. Mabel, sweet, sit here near this right-hand side of the machine, and when I give the signal, watch closely the back of the cover. Pray, both of you, be still as death. Here I will stand in front of the machine, and at the right time will raise my hand. The three took their positions, and the room was as still as a deserted vault. They waited about half an hour with exemplary patience. When the usual soft sound of the keys slowly touched was heard, they waited until the sound ceased. Mrs. Rose had her fingers on the gas key. Both women had their eyes on Manners standing before the typewriter. He raised his hand. Mrs. Rose turned on the gas. Mabel fixed her eyes on the back of the machine. Manners put his hands on the cover to lift it, but before he could do so, a tiny little beastie slipped out from the back of the machine, down on the floor, and out of sight under a bureau. "Why, it's a mouse!" cried Mabel. She was the only one who had seen or could have seen the sly, swift little sneak thief as he glided away, nor could she have done so had she not sat just where she did, and kept her eyes on the spot where he appeared. And this was the reason why the mysterious operator had never before been detected. Mrs. Rose stared in silent astonishment. Charlie laughed aloud as he said, "There, the mystery is out, literally out. Sorry to spoil a good ghost story, but truth is mighty and must prevail." "How did you guess it was a mouse?" inquired Mrs. Rose. "Because I happen to be acquainted with that little gentleman, and I know his ways and his manners. He lived somewhere between this floor and my ceiling, and he used to come down to pick up any crumbs that might fall from my midnight luncheons, which were generally eaten by me while seated at the machine. Now look here," he said, lifting the cover of the typewriter and showing them a small hole near the bottom of the case. "Here is where he got in, and now come and look down at these crumbs of cheese that have fallen between the keys, and through the bars to the bottom of the machine. These crumbs are what he was after, though he could never get them. But with the perseverance worthy of a mouse, he has tried it night after night, I suppose." "Yes, indeed, night after night," asserted both women. "And now I must give the machine a good cleaning and arrange Mr. Mouse's restaurant in some more satisfactory place," concluded Manners. "My story is told. I can safely leave it to the imagination of my readers to picture to themselves the simple wedding that made the young people and the widowed mother so well content, and the cottage at High Bridge with its garden and poultry yard. That was the delight of the mother, and the stable, and the one-horse carriage that was the treasure of all. The end. That was a bit of a letdown, but so be it. All right. Goodbye, Brav. Good boy.